I was reborn the moment I realized I had been chasing the wrong person all along. It wasn't just a change of heart, it was a change of destiny. In my past life, I had been obsessed with a man who didn't care for me, blindly following his every move, thinking he held the key to my happiness. But now, with this new life, I could hear his thoughts, every cruel word, every false smile, and it became clear. This time, I wouldn't be the one to beg for his love. Instead, I would chase after my own dreams, claim the future I deserve, and leave behind the past that had held me captive. And so, I walked away, stepping into a new university, where my only focus was me. No more waiting for someone to choose me. No more letting anyone dictate my worth. This time, I was going to take control of my own fate. I would become the person I was always meant to be, no longer bound by the chains of my past. I had always thought that my obsession with him, the boy who barely acknowledged my existence, was a product of my imagination. But now, looking back, it seemed so much more insidious. I had built my entire life around a single person who never once cared about me in return. And when he finally did notice me, I was already too deep in this emotional abyss to break free. I was drowning, desperately clinging to the idea of a relationship that was never meant to be. My name is Serena, and in my past life, I had been a mere shadow of myself. A girl who spent countless hours chasing someone who never truly saw me. Adrian West, the elusive, cold, and emotionally distant heir to a fortune I would never inherit. He was always so out of reach, his attention a commodity I could never afford. I had convinced myself that he was the man who would complete me, the one I would sacrifice everything for. And I did. I sacrificed my self-respect, my confidence, and my future. I had let myself become so enmeshed in his indifference that I lost sight of who I really was. But that was before. Now, I stood in the very same university I had attended in my previous life, only this time, I felt different. A weight had been lifted, one I hadn't even realized I was carrying. It was as though the universe had handed me a second chance, an opportunity to rewrite my story, to undo my past mistakes. The best part? I was no longer shackled by my own emotions, by the suffocating grip of a toxic obsession. When I opened my eyes to my surroundings, everything felt strangely familiar, but somehow, new. I still sat in the same lecture hall, still had the same friends, or at least, they appeared to be the same, and even Adrian still wandered the campus as if he owned it, his icy gaze as unattainable as ever. But this time, something had changed within me. I could feel it deep inside, a shift, a light flickering to life in the dark recesses of my heart. It wasn't the cold, unyielding logic that guided me now. I could hear their thoughts. The thoughts of everyone around me, their desires, their secrets, their judgments. At first, I had been stunned. Shocked even. It was overwhelming, to say the least. But as time passed, I started to realize just how much of an advantage it gave me. Suddenly, I wasn't the one fumbling around in the dark, desperately trying to decipher Adrian's indifference. I could see him for what he truly was, an emotionally distant and manipulative man who only valued me as long as I fed his ego. I had been foolish to chase him in my previous life. Foolish to think that a relationship built on his silence and my sacrifice could ever work. The truth was, I was never the one who mattered. I had been so caught up in the fantasy of it all that I failed to realize I was the one losing in the end. Now, I was reborn, and I wasn't going to make the same mistakes. I could see through people's facades, understand their true intentions. And I didn't have to settle for a life dictated by someone else. No longer would I be tethered to Adrian's fickle affections or live my life in his shadow. This time, I would chase my own dreams. I would create a future where I called the shots, a future where my worth wasn't defined by his lack of interest. But as I walked through the campus, the familiar faces and places began to trigger memories of my past life. I could still remember the conversations with Adrian, empty exchanges that were supposed to mean something but were merely hollow words meant to keep me hanging on. I thought of all the times I tried to break free, only to find myself falling back into the same toxic pattern. He was the type of person who thrived on control, and I had willingly handed him the reins. In my past life, I had hoped he would change, that he would finally notice me, see me as more than just a convenient distraction. But he never did. And I never stopped chasing him, always thinking that the next gesture, the next attempt, would be the one that made him see me for who I truly was. I could still feel the sting of those memories, the late-night texts I sent, waiting for a reply that would never come, the sacrifices I made to fit into his world, hoping that one day he would accept me. I had lost my identity, and for what? For a man who couldn't even bother to pick up the phone? A man whose heart was as cold as the marble floors of his family's mansion? But not anymore. This time, I would be different. Adrian West would not be the focus of my life, nor would I waste another minute of my time on someone who could never appreciate me. No, I had more important things to focus on now. I was determined to create a future that didn't revolve around empty promises or unrequited love. The new life I was about to live would be my own, and I wasn't about to let anyone, or anything, take that away from me. As I made my way across the campus, I couldn't help but notice how much the university had changed since my last life. The students I passed seemed so much more vibrant, so much more alive than I had ever felt in my previous life. It was as if the world had been waiting for me to wake up, to see that the opportunities one once thought were impossible were, in fact, right in front of me all along. I had the power to carve out my own success, my own happiness. And no longer would I be shackled by Adrian's indifference. But that didn't mean it was going to be easy. The internal struggle was still there, lurking beneath the surface. I had been conditioned to put others first, to think that my happiness relied on someone else's approval. But the more I observed, the more I realized just how little that had brought me. I knew the road ahead would be difficult. I would have to confront the people from my past, including Adrian, and face the truth I had long ignored. I had been chasing a dream that was never meant to come true. But this time, I had a secret weapon, the ability to hear their thoughts. With it, I would no longer be deceived by empty words or false promises. I could finally see people for who they truly were. No more games. No more pretending. It was my turn now. I wasn't going to be the girl who waited around for someone to validate her existence. I was going to take control, and for once, the world was going to listen. I was going to become someone who mattered, not because I clung to a dream, but because I created my own reality. I wasn't going to make the same mistakes. I wasn't going to chase him again. This time, I would chase myself, and nothing would stand in my way. It was a Wednesday afternoon when I first realized something was different. I was sitting in the university's crowded library, surrounded by students hunched over their textbooks, the faint rustle of pages filling the air. The familiar hum of anxiety and pressure that usually plagued my thoughts, fear of failure, fear of judgment, was suddenly absent. Instead, I heard voices. Not the usual background chatter you'd expect in a library, but something far more intimate, far more intrusive. At first, I thought it was just my mind playing tricks on me, maybe I was just imagining things. But then it happened again. As I glanced up from my notebook, I heard a voice, crystal clear and undeniably real. She thinks she's so much better than me, but I know she's just pretending. I can't let her get away with it. If only I could take the scholarship from her, then she'd see. It wasn't my own thought. It wasn't even the voice of the student sitting across from me. But somehow, it was so clear. As I tried to process this, another voice filled my head. Why does she look so calm? Does she have any idea how much I despise her? I froze. I stared at the girl sitting across from me, the one with the long black hair, who I'd never actually spoken to, but who always seemed to have a slightly smug air about her. And suddenly, I realized that the voices I was hearing were her thoughts. Every bitter, jealous, and envious thought she had was being broadcasted into my mind, as though I were hearing it aloud. I could hear the emotions behind them, the raw desire for something she wasn't willing to admit. I looked around the library, my heart pounding. I could hear everyone's thoughts, their desires, insecurities, and deepest secrets. It was as though the veil had been lifted, and I could see people for who they truly were. But I wasn't afraid. In that moment, I didn't feel scared, even though I could hear everything. In fact, it was liberating. It was like I had gained access to a hidden world, one that I had never seen before. For the first time in my life, I wasn't trapped in my own mind, second-guessing every word I said, wondering if I was good enough. I was free to truly see, and not just the world around me, but the very souls of the people within it. The more I listened, the more I realized how much I had been blind to in my past life. I had lived in a world of illusions, where I thought love and approval were the keys to my happiness. But now, hearing everyone's thoughts, I could see how shallow and manipulative people could be. Adrian West had never been the man I thought he was. He hadn't loved me, not really. He had only used me as a pawn in his own game of control. I could hear his thoughts now, too. They came in sporadic bursts, but they were loud and clear. Why is she still following me? I don't have time for this. I need to keep my focus. She's nothing but a distraction. If she doesn't stop bothering me, I'll have to make her go away. The words stung, but they didn't hurt like they used to. This time, I wasn't the naive girl who believed I could win his heart. I wasn't the one who believed my worth was tied to his affection. I could finally see Adrian for what he truly was, a cold, selfish person who only cared about himself and his status. His manipulations, his indifference, they weren't love. And for the first time, I understood that I didn't need him. The voices kept coming, and with each passing day, I realized something else. I wasn't just hearing the thoughts of the people around me. I was hearing their true selves. People's actions no longer seemed like a mystery. I could hear the guilt behind a smile, the envy behind a compliment, the regret behind a laugh. Every relationship I had been in, every friendship I had built, I could now see for what they were, falsehoods, each one built on a fragile foundation that I had once believed to be unshakable. I couldn't stay in the shadows anymore. I couldn't keep pretending that everything would be okay if I just kept chasing Adrian. I knew now that I had wasted so much time, chasing after a love that was never real, giving my all to someone who didn't care. And as much as the truth hurt, it also set me free. I didn't have to keep making the same mistakes. I didn't have to live in the past. This life was mine to control, and I had the power to change my destiny. But the realization was not a smooth road. It wasn't as if everything fell into place immediately. I was still surrounded by the ghosts of my past, memories of a life I couldn't undo. My relationship with Adrian wasn't something I could simply erase. Even though I no longer wanted him, I couldn't deny that a part of me still craved the idea of being seen by him, of being chosen. It was a desire that had been ingrained in me for so long, a need for validation that I had built my life around. It took time for me to accept that I no longer needed Adrian's approval. But with each new voice I heard, each new interaction I witnessed, I became more empowered. I realized how many people around me, especially the ones who claimed to be my friends, had only been using me, taking advantage of my self-doubt and insecurity. And with each whisper of truth I heard, I felt the chains that had bound me begin to loosen. I wasn't the same person I had been a week ago. I wasn't the girl who would wait for Adrian to change, to suddenly realize that I was worth his time. I wasn't the girl who needed someone to tell me I was enough. I had everything I needed inside of me. I started to change, slowly, at first. I stopped pretending to be the passive, quiet girl who blended into the background. I began standing up for myself, speaking my mind, and taking charge of my own future. I joined clubs that reflected my true interests. I reached out to people who didn't judge me based on the person I used to be. I stopped chasing Adrian. Instead, I began chasing my own goals, my own ambitions, my own happiness. I refused to let the fear of being alone dictate my choices anymore. I realized I had been living in a world of false hope, hoping that Adrian would change, hoping that I could be the person he needed me to be. But now, with my new power to see the truth, I knew better. I knew that the only way to truly live was to be myself, unapologetically and without compromise. The power of hearing people's thoughts became a symbol of my personal transformation. It was no longer a curse, it was my freedom. I could navigate relationships now, free from manipulation, free from the lies that I had once believed. I was empowered, and I was ready to reclaim the life that was rightfully mine. No longer would I chase after someone who didn't value me. No longer would I give my heart to someone who couldn't see it for what it was. This was my life now. and I was going to live it on my terms. The moment I made the decision, it felt like the weight of an entire lifetime lifted off my shoulders. I had spent far too long trapped in the echo of my past, haunted by memories of Adrian, surrounded by people who fed off my insecurities, my self-doubt. It was time to walk away, to leave it all behind. I had never truly realized just how much I had been defined by my surroundings, until I saw the full extent of how much they had shaped me. The people I had surrounded myself with, including those who had called themselves my friends, had only ever reinforced my self-imposed limitations. It wasn't their fault, it was mine. I had allowed them to dictate my path, to keep me small. But not anymore. I enrolled in a new university, one far away from the place where I had spent so many years chasing after someone who would never love me, where I had buried my potential to please people who didn't see my worth. The decision wasn't easy. It wasn't something I made lightly. My family didn't understand, and my friends, well, I was pretty sure I didn't have any real ones to leave behind. "Are you sure about this, Serena?" My mother had asked me, her voice laced with concern. "Leaving everything behind? Starting over isn't as simple as you think." But it was. It was simple, and it was necessary. For once, I was choosing me. I wasn't going to waste another second of my life trying to fit into a mold that never fit. I was ready to rebuild, to create a new version of myself, one that wasn't attached to the expectations of others. "I'm sure, Mom. I need this," I replied, my voice firm with a resolution I hadn't felt in years. I was done living for everyone else. And so, I packed my bags, left the place I once called home, and moved into a small apartment near my new university. A fresh start. The kind I had only dreamed of in my past life. The new university was exactly what I needed. It was vibrant, full of people with their own ambitions, their own passions. A far cry from the place I had left behind, where it felt like every day was a battle to be seen by the one person who never bothered to look. Here, people actually noticed me. And they noticed not just my face, but my presence. I wasn't just Serena, the girl who tagged along behind Adrian, hoping to be included. I was Serena, an individual with a voice and a purpose. The campus was buzzing with life, and I was surrounded by students who radiated energy and confidence. There were no whispers about my past here, no judgments based on the quiet girl I had once been. But as exhilarating as it felt, it also left me vulnerable. I had no idea where to start. No old friends to cling to, no familiar faces to hide behind. Everything here was new, every step I took was one I had never taken before. I signed up for a few courses in areas I had never explored before. Literature. Philosophy. Even business management. I realized that the things I had been interested in before, things I had never really allowed myself to pursue, were waiting for me now. I wasn't just an extra in the story of my life anymore. I was the main character. And then, one day, I stumbled upon a student-run club that immediately caught my eye, the Independent Creatives. It was a group of students who sought to carve out their own paths in the world of business, media, and arts, all without relying on the traditional career tracks that everyone else seemed to follow. It was perfect. When I walked into the first meeting, I could feel the energy in the room, the drive, the passion. These students didn't care about fitting in or following the typical narrative. They were here to create something new, to build something for themselves. I knew instantly that I wanted to be a part of it. Over the next few weeks, I threw myself into the club, meeting people who were focused on their own projects and visions. They didn't care about my past. They didn't care about the awkward, insecure version of me that had once spent her days chasing a man who didn't even know how to value her. They saw the new me, the one who was ready to stand tall, to embrace her independence. But it wasn't all easy. There were moments of doubt, times when I looked around at the others, wondering if they saw right through me. I was still vulnerable, still unsure about the person I had become. I questioned myself. Was I really capable of this new life, or was I just pretending? Was I just trying to escape from my past, or had I truly changed? The rumors didn't help either. I'd hear whispers in the halls, students who had heard about my past, my obsession with Adrian, how I had fallen for him so completely. Some of them wondered if I was just trying to run away from everything I had once known. Others speculated that I was just a product of my circumstances, a girl who couldn't handle the pressure of the world she had once been a part of. And those whispers, the ones that followed me into every room, made me question myself, just for a second. Was I running away? Was I really abandoning everything I once knew to chase a fantasy? But every time I felt that familiar twinge of doubt, I reminded myself of the truth: this was my life now. And this time, I was the one in control. I could hear their thoughts now, how they sized me up, how they judged me for trying to be something new, something different. But what I heard most often were the words of those who weren't judging me, but admiring me. I could hear the thoughts of those who respected my decision to change, who understood what it meant to break free from the chains of the past. And that made all the difference. In time, I grew more comfortable with the new me, the one who wasn't afraid to walk her own path. I learned to embrace the tension that came with being misunderstood. People didn't always understand why I had left my old life behind, why I had chosen to walk away from everything I had once known. But that was okay. I didn't need their approval. The real challenge wasn't proving to others that I had changed. It was proving to myself that I could keep going, even when the doubts crept in. Even when I heard whispers of my past that tried to pull me back into the life I had left behind. And as time passed, the whispers grew quieter. They couldn't drown out the confidence I was building, the friendships I was forging, the sense of purpose I was discovering. I was no longer the girl who waited for validation from others. I was the girl who validated herself, who trusted herself to make the right decisions, to follow her heart, and to build her own future. The new university was everything I had hoped for, a space where I could be who I truly was. And every step I took toward independence, every new connection I made, was another victory. It wasn't just a fresh start, it was a rebirth. It had been 3 months since I moved to the new university, and life was starting to feel more like mine. I was making strides, meeting new people, exploring new passions, and starting to gain the confidence I had longed for. I had left behind the shadows of my past and focused solely on building a future I could finally call my own. But just as I started feeling settled, the universe, it seemed, had other plans. It was a quiet Thursday when I first saw him again, Adrian West, the man who had been the center of my life for so long. I had thought I was over him, that I had moved past the version of myself who had spent countless sleepless nights hoping for his love. But when I saw him standing in the university's courtyard, chatting with a group of students, everything I had worked so hard to bury surged back up to the surface like a tidal wave. I stood frozen for a moment, unsure if I should approach him or just turn around and walk away. He was as impossibly handsome as ever, his confidence radiating through every casual movement. But this time, I didn't feel the same pull I once did. The once familiar ache in my chest was replaced with an unsettling sense of disconnection. I took a deep breath and turned away, but as I walked toward the student union, I couldn't help but wonder why he was here, at my university, of all places. Had he come looking for me? Did he even remember how many years I had spent pining after him, waiting for the day he might acknowledge me? But then, as I walked into the building, I heard his voice. What is she doing here? Does she seriously think I'll be impressed by this? I don't need her messing things up for me. I paused mid-step, my heart pounding in my chest. It was like a slap to the face. Those were his thoughts, Adrian's thoughts, loud and clear. I glanced back toward the courtyard, where Adrian was still talking, now with his usual air of indifference. His voice in my head grew louder, the words bitter and dismissive. She's just some girl who can't get over me. I'm not interested. She should just move on. I felt the sting of those words, but not in the way I thought I would. In my past life, those thoughts would have shattered me. I would have clung to his indifference, believing it meant something more, hoping he'd eventually change. I would have convinced myself that maybe, just maybe, I could be the one who finally broke through his walls. But this time, something in me snapped. I wasn't the girl who would chase after someone who didn't even acknowledge me. I wasn't going to let myself fall back into the trap of false hope. I could hear him, clearly, audibly, and his thoughts made it obvious that he didn't care. He wasn't worth my time. I was worth more than this. I turned away from the courtyard and walked into the union with a sense of newfound resolve. But deep down, I knew I couldn't just ignore the emotional residue that lingered. The feelings I had for Adrian weren't going to vanish just because I had heard his true thoughts. I still had to face them. Later that evening, I sat in my small apartment, staring at my reflection in the mirror. Had I really moved on? The past few months had been about me, about reclaiming my sense of self and my independence. But the emotional baggage wasn't so easy to shake off. The pull of Adrian's indifference was still there, an invisible thread that tied me to him despite my best efforts. I could hear his thoughts even now, echoing in my mind like a broken record. She's not going anywhere. She'll never be enough. I'm too far out of her league. It was the final nail in the coffin, the harsh reality I needed. He wasn't just indifferent. He was condescending. And worse, he had used me, not out of malice, but because I had allowed it. I had begged for scraps of affection, thinking they meant something. But in reality, they meant nothing to him. He didn't care. And that was the moment I realized I couldn't afford to be this person anymore. I couldn't keep carrying around this illusion that he would somehow change, that things would magically fall into place if I waited long enough. I had waited for years for Adrian to give me what I needed, and I had gotten nothing in return. It was time to cut the cord. I couldn't let myself be tied to someone who didn't appreciate me. I couldn't keep pretending that I mattered to him when he had made it so painfully clear that I didn't. I took a deep breath, closed my eyes, and reminded myself, I am not defined by my past. The next day, I found myself face to face with Adrian again. This time, however, I was different. I wasn't the insecure girl who had spent years trying to make him notice me. I wasn't the girl who would second-guess every word I said or analyze every gesture to see if it meant something. No. This time, I walked up to him, head held high, with a confidence I hadn't even realized I possessed. Adrian, I said, my voice calm, almost detached. He turned to me, that same smug look on his face, his eyes narrowing slightly as if he didn't expect to see me standing there. What do you want? He asked, his tone already dismissive. His thoughts, as always, matched his words. Why is she still here? Doesn't she get it? But I wasn't fazed. I could hear him, but I didn't care. Not anymore. I wanted to say something, I replied, my voice unwavering. I don't need your approval anymore. I've learned that the hard way. He looked taken aback for a moment, his eyes flickering with a hint of surprise. But he quickly masked it with indifference. I never asked for your approval, Serena, he said with a shrug. Exactly, I replied, standing taller now, my words sharp. You never did. And I finally understand why. The look in his eyes faltered, and I could see the briefest flicker of regret. But it was fleeting. It didn't matter. I wasn't here to get closure. I wasn't here to get any kind of reaction from him. I'm moving on, I said quietly, though my words carried more weight than I had ever expected them to. I'm going to live my life for me, not for anyone else. I turned away, feeling the weight lift off my chest with each step I took away from him. I had done it. I had cut the final tie that had bound me to him. No more false hope. No more chasing after someone who would never care the way I needed him to. As I walked away, I realized just how free I felt. For the first time in my life, I wasn't looking backward. I was looking forward, and the future was mine to claim. It had been 6 months since I made the decision to start over. 6 months of embracing a new environment, meeting new people, and building a life I could finally be proud of. I wasn't just going through the motions anymore, I was becoming someone. I was finding my voice, my identity, and with each passing day, I could feel myself growing stronger, more capable. My focus was no longer on who I was or wasn't in relation to someone else. My identity didn't depend on Adrian's approval or anyone else's validation. I had finally realized that my worth was something I could define for myself. And with that realization, came a shift that brought me both purpose and power. My first major breakthrough came when I stepped into the university's annual leadership summit. As I walked into the large conference hall, filled with bright-eyed students eager to make their mark on the world, something stirred inside me. I wasn't just a spectator anymore. I was here to take my place. The summit wasn't just an academic exercise, it was a place where students who had potential came to be recognized. I had spent so much time in the past being overlooked or dismissed, but now I realized that I didn't need to wait for someone else to notice me. I could make my presence felt, simply by being bold enough to claim it. For the first time, I found myself volunteering to lead one of the panels. I hadn't planned it. The idea of standing in front of so many people was terrifying at first. But then I realized, I had something to say. I had something of value to offer. So, when the opportunity arose to discuss a project on student innovation, I jumped at it. My voice, calm and sure, cut through the doubts that used to fill my mind. As I spoke about creating spaces for students to find their own paths, independent of the rigid molds society had set for them, I realized I wasn't just talking about academic freedom. I was talking about my own freedom, freedom from the expectations of others, freedom from the limitations I had once placed on myself. That day, I received unexpected praise from both peers and professors. I was invited to join several student-led initiatives focused on entrepreneurship and social change. This recognition didn't feel like a victory over others, it felt like a victory over the self-doubt that had once consumed me. It was a validation of my own worth, something I had never received in my past life. In the months that followed, I dedicated myself to building a new identity. I took on leadership roles in projects that I was passionate about, things that fueled my ambition and gave me purpose. I immersed myself in courses related to sustainable development and social entrepreneurship, two areas that spoke to me deeply. I had always been fascinated by how communities could support each other to thrive, and now I was learning how to be part of that change. I knew the path ahead wouldn't be easy. It never was. But this time, I was ready. I was no longer driven by the need to prove myself to someone else. I was driven by the desire to prove to myself that I was capable of achieving greatness, on my own terms. As my academic career progressed, I began exploring professional opportunities that aligned with my growing interests. I applied for internships with organizations that worked on community development projects, hoping to use my skills in a real-world context. The first internship I secured was with an NGO focused on empowering women in underprivileged areas. It wasn't glamorous, and it didn't come with the prestige of a corporate job. But it was something that mattered to me. It was something that felt meaningful. And for the first time in my life, I felt like I was doing something that would impact the world in a positive way. Despite the challenges of working in a nonprofit, I thrived in the role. I helped organize events, create educational content for young women, and initiate fundraising campaigns. I was constantly learning new skills that weren't just academic but practical and hands-on. I learned to connect with people, to listen to their needs, and to work collaboratively towards solutions. I realized that success wasn't just about numbers or recognition, it was about the difference you could make in someone's life. There were moments, of course, when I felt isolated. The sense of loneliness that had followed me from my past life occasionally crept in. I still wasn't completely used to the idea of being alone without someone to cling to. It was still strange not having someone in my life who I could rely on, who could validate my worth. But slowly, I began to understand that I didn't need that validation anymore. I had already achieved so much on my own. I was building my own foundation, brick by brick. And with each new achievement, no matter how small, it became clearer, I was more than capable of standing on my own. But it wasn't just about academic and professional success. There were moments when I realized how much I had grown emotionally and personally. The ability to let go of the toxic relationships of my past, especially my obsession with Adrian, had unlocked something within me. I had stopped seeking approval from others. I had stopped seeking to please people who didn't care about me. Instead, I had started to focus on building connections with people who respected me for who I truly was. I met a few people along the way who had no baggage attached. They weren't looking at me through the lens of my past mistakes or my old dependencies. They saw me for who I was in the present. And that made all the difference. One of those people was a classmate named Emma. She was passionate about social justice and sustainable practices, much like I was. We bonded over our shared interests, and through our conversations, I realized just how much I had been craving genuine relationships where mutual respect and understanding came first. Emma wasn't someone I needed to impress, she was someone I could learn from, someone who encouraged me to grow further. But even with all this progress, there were still moments when I doubted myself. During late nights of working on projects, I would feel the pang of uncertainty. Was I really cut out for this? Was I just a fraud pretending to be something I wasn't? The fear of failure never fully disappeared. It hung in the back of my mind, lurking just behind the triumphs and achievements. But then I would think back to everything I had already accomplished. I had come so far from the person I was in my past life. The girl who waited around for someone to notice her, for someone to validate her existence, had disappeared. She had been replaced by someone who had earned her place in the world through hard work, perseverance, and self-belief. The fear of failure was just that, a fear. It wasn't reality. And if I had learned anything, it was that success wasn't about avoiding failure, it was about learning to navigate it, to pick yourself up and keep moving forward. As the months passed, my achievements piled up. I received offers from several startups and NGOs to collaborate on major projects. I began to see the bigger picture of what I could do with the skills I had developed. The opportunities one had once thought were out of reach were now at my fingertips. And yet, with every new opportunity came new challenges I was ready to face. I wasn't afraid anymore. I had realized that true success wasn't defined by accolades or titles. It was about becoming the person I had always been capable of being. It was about doing the work, following through, and staying true to my values. The road ahead was still long, and the journey was far from over. But I had learned something invaluable along the way. The only person I needed to prove myself to was me. It was a cool autumn evening when I received the message. "Can we meet?" It was from Adrian. My heart raced as I stared at the screen. Adrian West. The name that had once held so much power over me. The name that had been the source of my every insecurity and every fleeting hope. For so long, I had clung to the idea that maybe, just maybe, he would finally come to his senses and see me as I truly was. But now, I had come so far. I had built a life for myself, one that didn't depend on his approval, on his attention. I had become someone strong, capable, and independent. But still, when I saw his name, the old feelings resurfaced, uninvited. I had come to peace with the fact that he wasn't the person I had imagined him to be, but that didn't mean it didn't still hurt. The temptation to meet him, to finally confront the past and close that chapter, was overwhelming. I hadn't spoken to him in months, hadn't seen him since that fateful day in the courtyard when I finally severed the tie that had kept me bound to him. And yet, I couldn't deny the unresolved tension that lingered. I thought of everything I had worked so hard for, the friends I had made, the work I had done, the confidence I had gained. I wasn't about to let him undermine that. I am stronger than this. The meeting place was a quiet cafe on the edge of town. When I arrived, I found him sitting at a table by the window, looking much the same as he had when we were together. Same icy composure. Same indifferent expression. It was as though he hadn't changed at all, but I had. "Serena," he greeted, his voice smooth, with a hint of surprise that I had agreed to meet him. "Adrian," I said, sitting down across from him. I studied him carefully, noticing the subtle changes, his hair a little longer, his clothes more meticulously chosen, as if to maintain the image of the man he thought he had to be. But his eyes, those cold, calculating eyes, were the same. The same as they had been when he looked at me like I was nothing more than a temporary convenience. "So? I've been thinking," Adrian began, his tone as casual as ever, as though we hadn't spent years in a tangled mess of misunderstandings and emotional dependency. "About us." I suppressed the urge to roll my eyes. I knew exactly where this was going. It was the same tired story, wrapped in new words, trying to lure me back into a cycle that had never been healthy for me. "I thought about what you said," he continued, leaning forward slightly. "About me not noticing you. about how I was emotionally distant. And I realized that maybe we could try again. I stared at him for a moment, my heart pounding in my chest, not with love, but with an old, familiar frustration. Here it was. The moment I had been both dreading and anticipating. The test of my own growth. The final confrontation with my past. I could feel the old Serena stirring, the girl who would have fallen for his words, who would have eagerly stepped back into the emotional trap he had laid. The girl who thought that maybe, just maybe, he had changed. But I wasn't that girl anymore. I leaned back in my chair, taking a slow breath. Adrian, I'm not the person I was when we were together, I said, my voice steady. And I'm not going to pretend that this, I motioned between us, is anything other than what it is, a reminder of how far I've come. A reminder that I don't need you to define me anymore. His eyes flickered with something, was it annoyance? Disappointment? I didn't care. I wasn't here to comfort him, to stroke his ego, or to fall back into the habits that had made me feel small. Serena, he said, his voice lower now, with a touch of irritation. You don't get it. I'm offering you a second chance. We can be together again. I've changed. I realized that I made mistakes. Don't you want this? I could hear the manipulation in his words, the subtle push to make me doubt myself, to make me feel guilty for not jumping back into his arms. But I had been reborn, I knew better now. You haven't changed, Adrian, I said calmly. I can hear what you're thinking. I can hear the truth behind your words. His eyes narrowed, and a flash of unease crossed his face. He hadn't expected that. I continued, unfazed. You still think you're doing me a favor by offering me a second chance. You still believe I need you to be whole, but I don't. I'm not the same person you used to know. I could hear his thoughts clearer now, louder and sharper, as though he was unaware that I was hearing them. She's still the same. She's just angry. She'll come around. She always does. I just have to show her that I'm the one who can give her what she wants. I shook my head slightly, a small smile forming on my lips, not because I was happy, but because I had never seen the truth so clearly before. No, Adrian. I'm not going to come around this time. You've shown me who you are, over and over. And I've spent far too long thinking I could change that, thinking I could make you see me as something worth caring for. But the truth is, I don't need you to validate me anymore. His eyes widened for a moment, his usual composure cracking. You're wrong. You can't just walk away from this. We had something real. You had something real. I had a version of myself that I thought I needed to fit into to earn your approval. I let the words sink in. But I'm done with that. I'm done with pretending that I'm not enough. I'm done letting you manipulate me, even if you don't realize you're doing it. I could see the shift in him now, the way his facade cracked just a little. For the first time, I wasn't scared to see the vulnerability beneath his mask. He looked at me, searching for a hint of the girl who had once craved his attention. But there was nothing there. You don't need me, do you? He asked quietly, his tone almost defeated. No, I said firmly. I don't. And I never will again. For the first time, I didn't feel the weight of his gaze. I didn't feel the pull of his indifference. I was finally free. Adrian opened his mouth as if to argue, but I stood up before he could say anything more. I hope you find what you're looking for, Adrian, I said, my voice clear and strong. But it's not going to be with me. I turned and walked away, feeling the last remnants of my old self fall away with each step I took. As I left the cafe, I realized something important. I had nothing left to prove. Not to Adrian, not to anyone. This was my life now, and I was no longer beholden to anyone's judgment or approval. I had reclaimed my power. I had claimed my freedom. And as I stepped into the world, I knew that nothing could hold me back anymore. The months that followed the final confrontation with Adrian were both quiet and profound. As I walked away from that cafe, I felt the weight of everything I had carried for so long finally begin to dissolve. Adrian's voice, his thoughts, had lost their power over me. The emotional chains that had bound me for so many years were shattered. I was free. For the first time, I felt the true weight of what it meant to be independent. And not just in the way I had thought of independence before, where I had tried to convince myself that I was okay without him, but in a deeper, more real sense. I was whole, not because of anyone else's approval, but because I had finally come to terms with who I was, with what I wanted, and what I was capable of. As the weeks passed, I found myself reflecting on everything I had achieved. It wasn't just the new friends I had made or the new goals I had set for myself, although those were important. It was the way I felt about myself now, the way I carried myself through the world. I wasn't seeking external validation anymore. I had stopped trying to live up to someone else's image of me, someone who had never really cared. I had spent so much time looking for a reason to justify my existence, trying to make sense of the toxic relationships I had clung to. But now, I realized that the only justification I needed was my own. I didn't need Adrian's approval. I didn't need anyone to tell me I was enough because I already knew that I was. I had worked for it. I had earned it. There were still moments of doubt, those inevitable moments when my old insecurities would resurface, whispering that I wasn't good enough, that maybe I wasn't cut out for the future I was building. But each time, I shut those thoughts down. I no longer had the patience for self-doubt. Instead, I focused on the future, on the path I was carving for myself. The world was no longer a place of limitations, of waiting for something outside of myself to change. I had changed. I had made the decision to stop being a passive participant in my life, to stop being reactive to the whims of people who didn't understand me. I had turned my back on the past, and in doing so, I had opened the door to a future full of possibilities. The opportunities one had once thought were beyond my reach were now right in front of me. The dreams I had once thought unattainable had started to take shape, and I was finally allowing myself to go after them. In the weeks after I cut ties with Adrian, I applied to graduate programs that had always seemed out of reach. I sought mentorship from professors and industry leaders who could help guide my next steps. I had the courage now to ask for what I wanted, to push for more, and to believe that I could achieve it. I wasn't the same person who had once held on to toxic relationships, hoping to be seen. I was now someone who could stand tall and trust herself to navigate the world without needing anyone else to tell her she was capable. I had become my own support system. And yet, even with the success I had begun to build, there were times when the silence of being on my own felt almost too loud. I wasn't used to walking through life without someone beside me, without someone to share my victories with. But I realized that this was a new kind of freedom, one that allowed me to be completely independent of anyone else's expectations. The freedom to define myself without compromise. One day, while walking across campus after a particularly difficult presentation, I bumped into Emma. We hadn't spoken in a while, but I had always admired her calm, grounded nature. She smiled when she saw me, and we immediately picked up where we had left off. "Hey," she said warmly, "how are you?" I hesitated for a moment before responding. "I'm good. I'm actually better than good. I think I'm finally getting the hang of this whole living for myself thing." Emma nodded knowingly. "It's not easy. But I think you're doing great. I've seen how much you've grown in the last few months. It's impressive." Her words weren't just kind, they were genuine. For the first time, I realized that the friendships I was building now weren't rooted in what I could give others. They were based on mutual respect and authentic connection. And that was more valuable than any relationship I had ever been in. Emma wasn't the only person who had supported me along the way. There were others, people I met in classes, at networking events, and through my internships, who had encouraged me to keep going, to keep pushing forward, even when I doubted myself. These were the relationships that were built on respect, not manipulation or expectation. They were the ones that mattered. Looking ahead, I knew the future would have its challenges. There would be moments when I would stumble, when I would feel the weight of uncertainty creeping back in. But I had learned something invaluable: I could trust myself. No one else needed to provide the answers or the strength for me. I had the ability to navigate my own life, to make my own decisions, and to create a future that was mine, and mine alone. There was no longer a need to look back, to wonder what could have been. Adrian and the toxic relationships from my past were fading memories. I had stepped into a new chapter, one where I was in control of the pen. The past was no longer an anchor holding me back. I didn't know exactly where my future would lead, but for the first time, I wasn't afraid. I had the tools now to succeed, not just professionally, but personally. I had learned to embrace my independence, to own my worth, and to trust that the best was yet to come. The journey wasn't over, it had only just begun.